Hi, good afternoon. My name's Phil Bicknell. I lead AHDB's market intelligence work from what's happening at the farm level, right through to what's happening at the retail and the consumer end, and what's happening in food service markets. Welcome to today's webinar, looking beyond COVID and towards the next normal. Now, it's probably an understatement to say that we live in uncertain times, but 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, well, that means there's ultimately a relatively strong demand for the products that farmers provide. But that doesn't mean that what we eat and where we eat stands still. It doesn't mean that our customer base stays the same or that competition doesn't shift. I'm conscious that farming as an industry, well, we probably tend to take maybe more of a wait and see approach. So particularly when we're dealing with relatively long production cycles. And I get that. When a storm approaches, when there's a host of uncertainty, it's natural that we batten down the hatches and wait for things to return to normal, wait for them to blow over. Seems like a sensible strategy. But my view is that the changes that are coming, well, they're not a blip. They won't just pass over. And it's all about how we adapt. Riding out the storm doesn't feel like the best approach in this instance. I'm really looking forward to the next hour with Dr. David Hughes, getting his take on the changes that are heading our way, the challenges that we're facing, and what it means for our industry. And we'll have some opportunity for questions and answers later on too. Before we hear from David though, just a couple of reminders on some housekeeping. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. As I mentioned, we will have a formal question period at the end. Feel free to ask questions as we go along throughout. You should see the question panel in your sidebar. So feel free to flag that, and also let us know if you're facing any technical issues you're experiencing with this webinar. The webinar is due to finish at around 5 o'clock. It will be recorded and it will be published on YouTube and the AHDB website. So you can revisit any of the content at any time. We will also be sending the slides to you. So as anybody that's heard David speak before will know, he covers a lot of ground in a short amount of time. So don't worry about frantically taking some quick notes. We'll get the slides to you. You will be prompted to answer a survey at the end of the webinar. Please take the time to give complete this. That feedback really helps us develop and improve the webinars that we run. So on to our speaker. I'm not going to give a big introduction to David, because ultimately I know he's the reason that this webinar has proved so popular and why you've all dialed in this afternoon. Now, in normal times, David travels around the world, giving his perspective on the global food industry, the developments that ultimately are affecting businesses and the agri-food sector. Now, David's still zooming around the world today, albeit virtually from his home in Monmouthshire, and I'm delighted that he's able to join us today. So, David, I'll hand over to you to begin.
Excellent. Thanks very much for the intro. And let me see if I'm showing my screen. I hope everything's looking good. Yeah. I just get me. People can see you. Good. You can all see me. Yes, Phil, I've got a lot to say, and I hope it's relevant. I'm a little bit apprehensive because it's if I look at arable and horticulture, it's a broad church with quite different sorts of businesses, but I hope there's enough sort of commonality that we can all get something out of this. So I better get cracked in. Just to remind you, yes, the slides are available. So off we go. And if those of you know me, you know that I like to start off with like a sort of global views, just to remind us that we're part of a wider world, this huge world of 7.8 billion people. And sort of interesting enough, I mean, although we're less than only about 0.5% of total, but the better part of 75% of the globe are in either Asia, 60%, or Africa. And what's more, when we add 2 billion, as we will over the next 20, 30 years, that the proportion of the global population that will be Africa or Asia based will be 80. So, you know, Europe has said that's a small little deal, and we're tiny in the great scheme of things. Okay, but moving on. Really, I've got to start and talk a little bit about COVID. I know, you know, it's a reality. And it's not a pretty reality, frankly. I looked at the front pages of the papers the UK papers from the beginning of the week, and you can see when Boris is scowling, you know, things ain't right. Millions face tough COVID curbs. There's the Star with its snakes and ladders. We're back to square one. And I loved Matt from the Telegraph saying, economic data is ranked in 3 tiers: appalling, ghastly, and apocalyptic. You know, great. But if you recall, you know, back early March, when we knew we were into something big and not nice, the perhaps naive perception is there were 2 basic scenarios. There was the V shape, that bang, we'd go down like every other country, but we'd recover quickly. So that's the V shape, or perhaps even a U with a sort of long bottom. But then no, perhaps it was more sort of complex than this, that it would be a W shape, where up there would be a second spike, so down we go, as has happened here. And not that I'm particularly prescient, but I've always thought that we were in for a W with hiccups. You know, who knows? And what's more, to make matters worse, if you can make it worse, we have the Brexit issue to deal with. And I was intrigued to look at HSBC's view on this, where they say actually, if there's a no deal Brexit, then essentially what that does is exacerbate what is already a very difficult position. So it'll ensure that the W, or the W with hiccups, will be particularly pronounced. And I think, look, that's important because we're in the food business. We're here because people eat our food. And so whatever, particularly in the UK, however consumers view their experiences through the COVID pandemic, it will have an enormous influence in how they behave during, as we are now, and after, in terms of what they go out and buy and whether they change behavior. So moving on, actually, what's again not the best is that how long will it take us to recover? Because it will depend on, you know, when we can actually claw our way out. And the fact of the matter is that the expectation is, first of all, we'll take the biggest shot probably of all the major countries. So Britain, here we go, the better part of 10% GDP down on the previous year. And it's going to take us 3 full years to claw our way out of it. So the expectation is by Q4 2023, we'll be in the same position from a household income point of view as we were in 2019. Now, some are better than us. For example, Germany comes out a full year earlier, but Italy probably a year later. You should look just on the left-hand side. Actually, of all the countries in the world, there's only really 2 who won't go into recession, and that's China and Indonesia. And in general, Asian countries have sort of managed this or have been less hard hit with COVID-19 than we have. So our consumers will have, along with everybody, it will be a long and a very bumpy road. When we'll come out, who knows? And I take the advice of a 20th century American philosopher, my favorite, who was the New York Yankees catcher, Yogi Berra, who said, "It ain't over till it's over." And that is so true. So who came out of this well? We're not out of it yet, but in terms of the food industry and major players, actually big supermarket chains have done relatively well. Why so? Because they were given all the market, for goodness sake. We closed down food service, and the big guys right around the world all had access to like 100% of consumers' food purchases. But also folk who did well was big food. Big food are the Unilevers, the Danons, the General Mills of this world, who pre-COVID were under pressure because they were seen to have food products that were like yesterday's food products, that they were being pushed out of the way by just new startup millennial financed companies. But actually they've had a really, really good COVID so far. Why? Because we've returned to those trusted old brands. And I mean, on balance, and good news really, farmers have had a better COVID experience than most industrial sectors. Notwithstanding, as I say, that clearly there's been field labor issues, markets lost in food service, etc. What did we do? Did you do this? Well, they did all around the world. When we were locked down, we rushed out to buy comfort foods, old favorites, storables, indulgent snacks, staples, valued price protein. Remember, there was a run on mince In Asia, there was a run on spam. Korea and the Philippines, for example, two pretty big countries, they're huge on spam consumption, and they were into noodles and rice. We were into bread or flour if we wanted to make it ourselves, and toilet paper, as far as I know. But in the same right across the world, and our shopping behaviour changed right across the world, not just in the UK. There was this huge move towards online grocery shopping. Doesn't matter where I look, and all the countries where I've worked last year, at least 12, 15 different countries, all of them have really pushed the online grocery shopping envelope. Australia, Malaysia, certainly in the US, and so it goes on. So what? Well, actually, that favors some food products. So, for example, we're more prone to buy frozen when we buy online. Why? Because it's easy to buy frozen online. You don't have to stick your head into a freezer cabinet or carry it home. So that's done. Anybody into frozen food has done relatively well. So online was a big deal. But also, as well as going to big supermarkets and using their online facilities, we've gone just around the corner to the corner stores, and just around the world too. This pre, post, and during COVID, there's been strong international growth in local smaller store retailing, certainly in the UK, and also back to the greengrocer, to the butcher, if you will. I think that's sort of great, because it just sort of reinforces the need for these supply chains, which were on the wane, frankly. 7-Eleven, we'll all know it. It's not big in the UK, but it's a huge deal around the world, and they've had a fantastic COVID. Okay, what about the hard discount guys? In the UK, that's Aldi and Lidl, but I see them in China, Australia, wherever I go. And actually in the UK, they didn't have a great COVID lockdown. Why? Because they didn't have a good online offer, but they're hugely influential. And why is that? Well, look at this. Okay, I'm shopping Tesco online at the moment. Every Monday, Mr. Tesco just delivers our groceries. Good on him. But what I notice, of course, and we all know, that Tesco on KVIs, on those key value items that we have in our head and we can sort of roughly remember the price of, that they're competing, they're price matching Aldi on certain items. And I've just put some veg up here to show, and some fruit actually. So, for example, Tesco Maris Piper potatoes, Aldi price match, 50p a kilo. My Lord. What about the carrots? They are imperfect, but they're perfectly imperfect. 35. When I show people around the world these prices, they cannot believe it. I'm a great blueberry eater of a morning, and Tesco matches with Rosedene Farms, the fake farms that they love and farmers love to hate, at 89p a punnet. It's so you can see the effect that hard discounters have of sort of forcing down prices, and we know what that means. That pushes margins in the supply chain. I've got a comic every Saturday, which is The Grocer, and every week they look at 33 prices across all the supermarkets, and every now and again they put in a hard discounter. Last week they put in Lidl, and we can compare the prices. Lidl was far and away the cheapest place to shop for the 33 items. They beat Asda by 12% and Waitrose by 54%. And so, look, the dynamics of supermarket chain retailing is that you've got to be price competitive, or you'll lose those customers down the bottom who've got the lower household incomes. And once that happens, then your business starts to unravel. So hard discounters post-COVID are going to be leading the price war. Why is that important in the UK? Well, on the right-hand side, I've taken some US data, and what it shows here is it's exactly the same in the UK as it is in the US, that through COVID, high-wage workers are better off, have had a better COVID than low-wage workers. It's exactly the same in the UK. And so moving to the left of the slide, it means that that portion of the market which have insecure incomes, those who are going to trade down, or those at the very low end who are sort of more desperate, they're going to be driving, they're going to be looking for low food prices, and that will determine the whole sort of environment, if you will, of grocery price retailing in the UK. Pressure on prices, I would suggest. And of course, who did badly? It was food service. What's more, it was devastating. just closing down restaurants, food to go outlets right across our country. And of course, that hit farmers in some particular cases, those farmers that were in supply chains that service, for example, milk into major coffee chains, etc. No, it's been hard. Well, and particularly, it's still hard. Why is that? Because the UK, for one reason or another, I can tell you again later, we're particularly likely to stay at home and work, much more likely actually than other countries in Europe. And as a result of that, in the center of major urban areas, it's been sort of devastating. My other comic on a Saturday is The Economist, and if I go to their HQ in the center of London, within 5 minutes walk, there are 5 Pretz, there are 2 Itsus, there's a Wasabi, there's a McDonald's, there's a Five Guys, there's a Leon's, and they're largely empty. Those businesses have been devastated, and they're clawing to try and get some recovery, and it's not happening for them. So do I think that's bye-bye eating out? Well, no. And one really particularly interesting trend that's been just accelerated right through this pandemic is the emergence of huge restaurant meal delivery platforms. In the UK, Just Eat would be a major one, Uber Eats, Deliveroo, etc. And what we find around the world is there's been huge consolidation of these companies. In the US, for example, DoorDash is #1, but Grubhub is owned by Just Eat, which is a Dutch and British firm. Uber Eats has just bought Postmates. And I see right around the world there's now about 8 big restaurant meal delivery platforms that just have got the concentrated power of meal delivery right around the world. It's astonishing. So bye-bye restaurants? No, but we will eat in less. What we'll do is we'll eat out in. So yes, we'll go to our favorite restaurant, but we'll go there electronically. I think that's important from a supply chain point of view to see, how does that have an impact on my business? Moving on. Will the coronavirus pandemic, will it make us all germaphobes? Well, probably not, but it's certainly all about contactless stuff. And actually, it's been really good in terms of trend, accelerating the trend towards local food. But again, if we take sort of food culture, when I'm in Italy and certainly when I'm in Asia, I notice that there's a strong culture of sharing food. But is this bye-bye British buffets? Maybe. We don't want anything that we think somebody else has touched. Now, this is the most unlikely David Hughes slide, but just in my spare time, I just looked at how we work, how we shop, how we watch, how we play, how we travel, how we heal, how we make our family healthier, how we learn, how we trade. And what I found was that as a result of COVID-19, we're doing more of some things and less of others. And so, for example, how we shop, we're doing more online, we're doing more local, we're buying more trusted brands, we're using less shopping malls, we've got less household income. Some people are buying less premium foods, but others can still afford. What about healing? Well, we're doing much more interest in managing family health. There's more fresh, more natural foods. And what's more, there's going to be more government regulations, even taxes on unhealthy foods. So moving on. Just a little point on Brexit. Look, if I look at the basic statistics, I'm never sure who to believe, but this is DEFRA, where essentially they're saying that the UK is 55% self-sufficient, if you will, in food. Actually, the food strategy document from, is it Henry Dimbleby, suggests that it's 60-62, but never mind. Let's say it's 60%, give or take. And where does most of our food come from to get up to the 100%? From the EU. So between us, the UK and the EU countries, we've got what, 86-87% of total food. So it reminds me, where's our best market? At home. And what's more, we've got all sorts of opportunities to increase that level of self-sufficiency. And where's our next best market? Just across the Channel and the Irish Sea. Why wouldn't it be? They know us, they know our standards, we know them, we're familiar with them. And from my own personal point of view, I think it would be heartbreaking if there wasn't a deal on Brexit. And I rather think there will be, if we can just get over, not least the fishing deal. And who's it going to affect the most if there was no deal? But actually, I think that plants agriculture, as I've called it, it's probably less damaging than animal agriculture. However, out of season fruit and veg would be significantly higher priced if we were importing and using basic WTO tariffs, and consumers certainly wouldn't like that. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I think we're on for a deal, but it will be late and it will limp in. There's a surprise. Here's some just key findings, by the way, from a Kantar and the Fresh Produce Journal event, I think it was 2 days ago. And it's for the hot guys, really. Close to 80% of people who bought produce during lockdown say they've continued to buy more since lockdown eased. And that's not surprising, remember, because we're not buying it outside in restaurants. People are shopping less frequently, yes, fewer queues, and we're concerned about safety. But 31% of people say they will reduce their fresh produce consumption if Brexit pushes up prices. There may be trouble ahead. Look, now moving on to sort of trends which have been accelerated through COVID. Probably the biggest mega trend of the last 2 years, 3 years in the global food industry has been the march forward of plant-based foods. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Why? Because you produce plants. After all, you're the plant guys. And it's sort of intriguing on this sort of fake meat plant-based foods. There are two firms, Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. Between them, those two have taken $2 billion of venture capital out of the market in the last, 18 months. And it is just, there's a tsunami of plant-based fake meats arriving all around the world. And what's more, every single big food company is into it. You know, ones that are most unlikely. Kellogg's, aren't they, the breakfast cereal people? And they've got this sort of brilliantly named Kellogg's Incognito unveils plant-based burgers, bratwurst, and Italian sausages. Everybody's into this. Nestle, the largest food company in the world by far, is in it up to its neck. Here it is too with its sensational Vuna, so plant-based tuna. And when I'm in China, it's they're there too. Here's KFC. I mean, even the Colonel's gone green, for goodness sake, selling plant-based chicken nuggets. Starbucks in China into Omni Pork, which is a plant-based pork. And what sort of concerns me, I was talking to the meat guys recently in the UK saying, what you've got to watch is that these big players, the Unilevers of this world who are into plant-based stuff, are really, really good at marketing to consumers. They're really consumer focused and they reflect demand pull, whereas often primary fresh food products, not least, it's not only meat, but I think fresh fruit and vegetables tend to be production led and driven by supply push. We produced it, now let's push it out. And yet, if I look at these up and coming plant-based companies, I mean, Ball, which came out of Innocent in the UK, they're brilliant products, really. And I think it's the biggest threat to fresh produce and to fresh meat is the consumer focus of plant-based protein. You can't help but buy these. They're just brilliant. And what's been driving this? So what's the whole thing about plant-based? It's hardly new. Actually, the biggest proportion of the of protein globally is made up by plant-based protein, by the by. But it's this sort of notion of climate-friendly and planet-friendly diets that's been gaining real traction. Talk to your children and grandchildren; they'll tell you all about it. And here's Greta with the yellow anorak on the right, who's the Swedish woman. She's 18 by now. She's so influential. She's also bloody irritating, but then she is influential, for goodness sake. And it's not just her and the young that are pushing this. It's also being pushed by the UN, who say we have to be into more plant-based diets. And what's more, our own governments are saying, cut back on meat. You might be cheering to hear that. And then there's just constantly this flood of research pointing out what we should be eating if we want to take into effect the environmental impact and the health impact. And look at that left-hand bottom quadrant. Nuts, legumes, olive oil, whole grains, potatoes, veg, fruits, they're all the good guys. And the top right, the red ones, they're the unprocessed red meat and processed red meat. They'll kill you, for goodness sake. And of course they won't. But you can see the effect this is having right across the world as people start to adapt diets. And what's more, as a result of coronavirus, that the better part of 4 out of 10 Brits have said, I'll buy much more green, sustainable products now and after COVID. Now, whether they will or not is another matter, but they think they will at the moment. And I think that's sort of enormously influential. Here, just last week, was it October 2nd, there was a new store in Sweden which prices its food goods based on carbon emissions. And I put that up because it's sort of interesting itself, but this is already happening. If you look at Oatly, which is an oat-based milk, they already put their carbon footprint on their product. Quorn, which we all know, it was British, it's now Filipino owned, do exactly the same. What's my point here? I think within 2 years, it will be mandated that all food products will have to have an Enviro score on front of pack. At the same time, they'll have a nutrition score on front of pack. And I think that's sort of great news for most people in the plant-based sectors. Why? Because if I looked at the Enviro score of potatoes, for example, or apples, or, you know, just your own products, I bet you'd look really, really good. Make sure that if for anybody in fresh produce, put your Enviro score on the pack. Tell people how good you are. And it's already happening, as I say. Look, here we go with Brewdog. That I mean, they're a canny lot. Selling craft beer is now carbon negative. Or on the right-hand side, here's Weetabix with if it's not grown within 50 miles of here, it doesn't go in the pack. And in the middle, Barilla, a great pasta company from Italy. And what are they selling here? What's a key attribute of their product? It's not the pasta, it's not the spaghetti, it's the package in which it's in. It's saying, look, it's not made of plastic, it's made of something that's recyclable. So just a word on, you know, you're the arable guys, you grow oats, and this grates the teeth, I might tell you, of dairy people. So what about plant-based non-dairy dairy? There is, I think there's just a clear arable opportunity. And here's Vinnie Jones, who's a real chancer, hard man though he is. If you went back 8 years ago, what was Vinnie saying? He'd say, you know what's good for you, make mine milk, said hard man Vinnie. And goddamn, June 2020, there he is, say, you know what's good for you, make yours oat. Yeah, right, there's All Pro, which is made by Danone. And look, there's lots of horsepower in oats, so big food piles in. Here's Carnation. Remember Carnation milk in cans? You can still buy it. Now you've got the oat version. Or Mars have got their Mars Bar Galaxy and their Bounty milk drinks. What's it made of? It's made of oats. So lots of, you know, now we're being fueled by oats. It used to be our horses. And what's more, there's some great products out there, oat-based, whether they come from the UK or Oatly, which is Sweden. But I just put this in because here's Arla. You know, we're all part of Arla if you're in dairy in the UK, but it's essentially Scandinavian. And I get the feeling that the Scandos, you've got to watch them like a hawk. They're nicking our oats. They're setting themselves up to be the Nordic oat drink. So the oat drink has become Nordic. I think it should be British, for goodness sake. Nice to see us here with a bright barley drink too. So you know, there are arable opportunities clearly in value-added products. Why do I go on about this? Because look, I've been involved in furthering the plant-based sectors, not least in Canada. I'm a Canadian as well as a Brit, and Canada sees the prairies, see it as a huge, huge opportunity for them to diversify from their just grains and oil seeds into pulses. They're very good at pulses. Here's Roquette, one of the great plant protein companies of the world from France, just opening the world's largest pea protein facility in Canada, in Manitoba, actually, Portage la Prairie. Here's ADM, Artisanal Midlands, as is, discover the next level of pea protein. All the trade magazines I look at for the food industry, they're all pushing pea protein. And we've got Meatless Farm Company from the UK, who are never sort of quiet about what they're doing, ditching soy in favor of pea-based recipes. Are we good at peas? I would hope so. So what's my point? Here's the Scandos are saying, Razio from Finland saying, growing demand for gluten-free oats, we have it. The Canadians are saying exactly the same. Super cluster for plant proteins. There must be opportunities in the UK going forward. And for goodness sake, just to raise a smile, here's Reebok, and they've just launched plant-based performance sneakers. I did a quick little tweet here. Reebok has launched a plant-based running shoe made from eucalyptus tree, castor beans, algae, and real rubber. And I just wondered if they're planning to do a pair in beef. I just wanted to feel good for the meat guys. Moving on. So pre-COVID and accelerated through COVID has been this increasing consumer interest in where their food comes from, who produced it. They want to learn where their ingredients come from. I think that's good news for arable guys, very good news. And so it's about storytelling. So I just put in two quick little vegetable examples about good storytelling from a UK and Ireland perspective. Here we are, strong roots, and the benefactor, the CEO, Sam Denigan, is he sharp or what? He's got some brilliant products here. I mean, essentially like the frozen vegetables, but they're frozen vegetables in a style and packaged in a way that just meets, not least, younger people's requirements. Brilliant, yet pretty basic. And we'll all know Mash Direct from Northern Ireland, who do such a good job by just picking up pretty basic root vegetables and turning them into something, into comfort food that we love to buy. Good exports, both of them doing really well. And again, in the world of veg, I mean, I see this, right around the world. What a good job Cauliflower has done in the US with its using cauliflower as a pizza base, or here's Green Giant with its rice veggies of every description. Bolthouse Farm in the US, which was owned by Campbell's, who made a real bollocks of it, and then sold it, and now it's carrot fettuccine, rice carrot kit, and carrot dogs. A great alternative use of the. So how are we doing? How are we doing in arable and horticultural crops with regard to health? Because health is on trend, big time. There's unequivocal evidence that obesity and diabetes increase your health risks associated with viruses, and so government is just say they're determined. In the past, they've tried to nudge us into better diets, but I think increasingly they'll start to do something with a bigger stick, like tax, for example. They want us to eat less, and they want us to be healthier, and expect to see more regulation related to food and to food health. But look at the proportion of the Eat Well plate that is by arable and horticultural crops. It dominates, not just in the UK. Here, take the Canadian plate, and a good 3/4 relates to non-meat, for example, and non-dairy. The red meat and dairy guys are livid about it. So what's my point? If you're in fresh produce, if you're in plants, and if you've got something which is basic, very healthy, make sure you tell people that it's healthy. So, for example, we all know Ocean Spray. They've managed to make cranberry juice, which is undrinkable unless you mix it with something else or put sugar in it. But they have a health claim. The health claim is particularly directed at women. It's about UTI, urinary tract infections. They can now put that on their front cover. If you can make a health claim, make it. Don't assume the consumer will work it out for herself. And we're hopeless at doing that in horticulture, to be perfectly honest. So I'm saying don't be shy about shouting about the health benefits of your product. I'm lucky enough to work every now and again with Zespri out of New Zealand, who are the monopoly marketer of kiwi fruit. And look what they say, I'm refreshingly sweet and have 3 times more vitamin C than oranges. They're not shy. Or in Asia, where they do so well, they put kiwi fruit on a sort of immune boosting basis, which is very, very effective. It would be effective in this country too. We never mention. And of course, people want to be healthy, but also particularly younger people, they start to look at 3 meals a day and say, no, that doesn't suit me. And actually, well, when do you eat? Well, I eat when I'm hungry. I might have a mini meal. I might have a snack. And it's again pre-COVID, but during COVID too, we're a snacking nature, and snacking and sharing is firmly on trend. So how can we take advantage of that? Because almost every product I see is say, can you put it in a snack format? And you certainly can with fresh produce. The good news is that we're getting better on our 5-a-day. Looking at the Kantar data, that last year we were getting 3.1 of our 5-a-day, and now we've upped that to 3.4. But it's intriguing if you work out which fruits, for example, are most likely, what have done the best going through COVID. And actually it's soft fruits, so strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, grapes, and bananas. Why so? Because you can snack on them easily. And the biggest opportunity for both fruit and veg for lunch it's actually for snacking. And remember, people always talk about health. They say, we want to eat more healthily, but convenience trumps health. If it's not convenient, they won't eat it. Oops, I'll move on. Okay, this is still on the same area about, look, origin gives reassurance of quality and safety. People want to know where the product comes from, who produced it, and how they produced it. That's a brilliant opportunity for us as British farmers to tell our story even more than we do now. Why? Because you can see these sort of social pressures are starting to build and surrounding food. A lot of it is livestock and meat. So remind me again what we can't eat. Anything with palm oil as an ingredient. Chicken that's been fed soy from Brazil. Let's move on. Slave labor in the vegetable fields. Milk from zero-grazed cows. Pork from pigs confined in the stalls. Look, UK plant agriculture is not immune from social pressures. What are the major social issues which will disturb growth in the UK arable and fruit and vegetable sectors? Do they present challenges and/or opportunities? I think there's real opportunities there. And look what they are. Here we are. UK retailer M&S swaps soy feed in its milk supply chain with high-performing alternatives. So what are they feeding if they're not feeding soy in the dairy cattle feed? Well, they're feeding rapeseed and sugar beet. So is there an opportunity? Yes, there is. We don't grow soy. We sure as hell can, if we can, grow rapeseed, as long as we're not banned because of herbicide. But on the right-hand side, here's Barilla, again, the great pasta company, but they're also great at biscuits. And all their products now are palm oil free. So what? Well, instead of using palm oil, they're using rapeseed oil. So these sort of social issues relating to food give us opportunities. What I notice around the world too is that big business is increasingly reaching down to the raw material producers, its sort of raw ingredients of its products. They never used to do that. They assumed it was there and it was just part of the supply chain. So, and why? Because activist consumers are asking big food, these big companies, whose side are you on? What do you stand for? What's your purpose? And the two best firms for my mind addressing this would be Unilever and Danone. I mean, Danone is setting out its stall to become just better corporate citizen. It's becoming an entreprise à mission, a company whose purpose and objectives in the social and environmental field is set out and is reported on every year by a third-party independent auditor on consumer health and nutrition. Look, on water, ag, biodiversity, etc. Unilever doing exactly the same. And what I notice is these big food companies are suddenly into regenerative agriculture. And you know, you might, as farmers, just smile wryly and say, what do they know? Well, no, exactly. But again, this is an opportunity to get closer to some of the biggest customers of the food industry, I'd suggest. Cargill joining Regen Ag, as it's called, sets goal for 10 million acres in the US. General Mills is doing exactly the same. Here's Danone with their alliance with DSM in Europe. So it's that, you know, are we embracing Regen Ag? Many farmers already are and have been doing for generations, I would suggest. And another interesting thing, again, which is pushing this sort of sustainability agenda for big food, but all the way back to the farm, is that suddenly green finance has become a big deal. And what's that? Green finance is when major financial institutions that are borrowing money will give special deals to their major customers who are strongly positive on sustainability issues. So in Canada, for example, Maple Leaf Foods and the Bank of Montreal enter into the first sustainability-linked loan in Canada. And again, the biggest players, here's Amazon. I mean, Jeff Bezos isn't short of a bob or two launching a 2 billion climate venture capital fund, he's committing 10 million to new Bezos Earth Fund. So sustainability has become big time for big food, and it's a great opportunity for us in arable and horticultural agriculture to get closer to these big customers, I would suggest. Okay, so just a rush towards the end here. Look, war and political and/or economic convulsions can serve as a ground clearing experience, opening the way for new men and women, new organizations, and new modes of operation. Don't you sense that? You know, we've had our war, or we're in our war, and we'll get out of our war, our viral war. So now let's get into our hurry up offense. And I see that happening right across the food industry, a rate of change I haven't seen in my professional lifetime, which is like decades. So for example, I would expect to see going forward a sort of fast moving in legislation relating to genome editing. I mean, what I notice here, I mean, the red is genome edited crops are regulated as GMOs. And where are they regulated? Essentially the EU. But I note the UK discussions ongoing for post-Brexit. Will there be opportunities here? I think it will just accelerate the rate of change. We can see it around the world. I mean, I've just taken a horticultural example. A pitless cherry pairwise uses CRISPR. So for example, using technology which consumers increasingly will have some clue of, and they won't find as frightening as full-on GM. But even that, I think there are cracks in the wall, frankly. Golden rice being approved as safe for consumption in the Philippines, I think was a great move forward. You know, so you've got a vitamin deficiency problem in the Philippines. Frankly, I think it's immoral that you're not allowed to use GMO'd rice, which addresses exactly that problem. But I think it's coming, and I think it's coming at pace. But also, if I look at our industry and, you know, right across the globe, automation in the agriculture and food industry, it's been accelerated by the whole COVID-19 business. I mean, I think, frankly, big arable has been into this for a long time, but we're starting to see real movement, and not before time, in horticulture, where it's more fiddly, I would suggest, whether it be robot apple pickers, etc. But, you know, look at the role that drones have had, just sort of fabulous, and how quickly, really, that has come. And it needs to come. You know, we need help. Why? If I look at UK agricultural labour costs, they've risen inexorably, but farm output prices typically haven't. And plus, there are additional costs associated with COVID-19, for goodness sake. We need help, and the help comes with technology. I mean, for long enough, I've been involved, or have been involved, in the fresh berry business in the UK and elsewhere. And if I look at, this is over like a 10-year period, UK average retail prices per kg for fresh berries, they've been pretty much flat over a 10-year period. Right, have costs been flat? No. So what's the squeeze on? Margin. So we've had to increase productivity on a sustained basis. And this is for a really, really successful crop that there've been no movement in prices, for goodness sake. So, I know fresh berries continue their strong growth. They represent, now fresh berries in the UK, more than a quarter of the total value of the UK retail fruit basket. This year we're in, it's grown by 9+%. Fruit's done very well. This is retail. Of course, we've done well because, of course, we're not eating fruit outside the home. And, you know, yes, I'm just encouraged to see the level at which we're getting into robotics, using AI in the horticultural industry. Tomato harvesting launching September in the US. I see Berry Gardens, my old company, if you will, into robotic picking, or just starting to experiment in it. But actually, a big deal. Here's Driscoll's, far and away the largest player globally in fresh berries, now working with Plenty, which is a pretty serious vertical farming business in the US, teaming up together to actually address the whole idea of growing in vertical farms strawberries. And what sort of intrigues me in terms of technology is that the home of venture capital doesn't seem to be in Europe. It seems to me it's in California, if anywhere. Here's Plenty company working with Driscoll's. It's pulled out $500 billion in financing over a relatively short period of time in vertical farming. I mean, somebody believes this is going to have a financial payoff. You know, I'm a bit more skeptical, but that's the way it is. So this whole vertical farm operating, is it part of the future? I'm not sure how, but it's coming one way or another. I've taken the example here of InFarm, who again are hugely funded, but this time from a European basis. We're going to just see lots more of that. And what about addressing this margin squeeze? Again, back to Zespri. What do I think about that? I mean, I think Zespri does such a good job for its growers. Why? It's best in class. It has an R&D partnership with Plant and Food Research so that it co-owns the varieties, unique varieties. So, for example, the red kiwi. It's brilliant at brand development. It's got a real focus on health, particularly in Asia, and it's got supply chain management excellence all the way through the year. And look, wherever I look, it's these sort of protectable plant varieties that increasingly seem to me to take prime position in premium markets. Let's take, well, here's a selection just in front of you, but let's take the Pink Lady, which really gets up the nose of UK apple growers because we don't grow them. But if I look Tesco online this week, then Pink Lady are at a 65% premium to Gala and Braeburn. Why? Because they advertise well, it's well branded, they control supply, and it seems to deliver benefits. The rest, and you know, you don't see Tesco Pink Lady in Tesco being priced a la Aldi, I can assure you. And so other examples here, I noticed Del Monte have just launched their pink fleshed pineapples, and just as well. Why? Because again, if I go online to Tesco this week, the regular pineapples are Aldi price match, 79p. What? For a full pineapple? No, I want to buy a pink fleshed pineapple, and I'm happy to pay 4 times the price for that. So these protected varieties. And what's more, I think that's coming, and it's coming to big arable too. I just start to see it in Australia, where they have what's it called, barley max, which is sort of high fiber barley. And now you see food products which specifically identify the variety of barley on the front of pack. And I noticed that Lima Grain from France and Arista Partnership are now marketing this first high fiber wheat ingredient in Europe. So there are opportunities here to break out of the commodity trap, which is a real problem, I think, for many of us who are in the fresh fruit and vegetable world. I'm not going to prattle on. It's my time to stop, and I would like just to take questions if we can. And I hope you're still with me, and thank you for listening. I know I've got to do something.
Thanks, David. No, stay there. That was great. And you covered an awful lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. So many thanks for that. We're going to jump onto questions in a moment, but for the audience out there, there is a quick poll that will appear on the screen in a moment or two, hopefully. Great if you could just give us an indication of just some of the different change areas that give you the most cause for concern when you look ahead in the next couple of years. Some broad topics and themes there. We're just really interested in terms of what your views are, and we'll come back to that in a bit. I'm going to jump in with questions, David. One of the early ones we got was, what's your view on organics? What are the prospects there for the organic sector? I guess if we look back to 2008 and recession, organics got hit by the squeeze in the economy. However, when you look at the sector, maybe it's well positioned around claims on, I don't know, local or health. What's your take on the organic outlook?
Right. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah, good. I've just turned off my screen for some poor reason because I'm inept technically. What do I think about organics? Look, if you look at the last recession, then in the UK, organics suffered. And not surprisingly, wherever you get a sort of nip on consumer incomes, then people would tend to trade down. But I mean, interestingly enough, in North America during that same period, that didn't happen. And what will happen if I look at this this time? The fact of the matter is that there's a proportion of people who have households in the UK who will have not suffered desperately from an income perspective during COVID-19. And what's more, they'll have saved money because they're not going out. And so that group are in a position where they can have treats at home, where they don't have to cut back and make savings. And what's more, I think they're disproportionately the organic shoppers. So I think on balance, there will be a squeeze on organics, but there'll still be some strength there because there's loyalty to the product. There's concern about food safety. And this is a perception. It's not that organics are any safer, but there's a perception that they are. So I would just globally, I think it depends on the consumer base, but in general, I don't think we've got to panic if you're in organic. It would be rather better than I expected it to be if you'd asked me that, say, 6 months ago.
Okay, thanks. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned was I suppose, if you look at the UK in particular, fresh produce side of things, you present some great examples of branded products around the world. When I compare that to what I see when I go into UK retail outlets, there's a lot of own brand, own label stuff. Kind of combine that with then the environmental pressures and the expectations that we've got. And where does that quite leave British growers and producers? So I guess the risk I've got, or concern I've got, is that consumers aren't going to pay for it, and because it's on own label product, actually retailers make it part of the criteria to supply. So how do we solve that particular issue?
Well, and it is an issue. I often get asked the question from irate growers and say, who's going to pay for all this sort of environmental sustainability, this, that, next thing? I mean, the fact of the matter is that globally, the green bar is going up. And my view is that you don't get a premium for getting over the green bar. You get discounted if you go under. And that's an issue. It means it's just more pressure on growers that they have to be more productive, meet these increasing requirements if they want to get into those higher value supply chains. I mean, there was another part of your question was that, I mean, in the UK, there's disproportional private label or supermarket label of fresh produce. There's much more branding in the US, for example. And of course, in the UK, why do supermarkets want to have their own brand on fresh food? Because they want the halo effect associated with fresh food. As a result of that, I think it constrains brand development. Of course it does. And also it constrains purchases because there's another thing which is unrelated to brand. There's a sort of lack of theatre. That it's pretty boring, that and often is not. I was talking the other day to tomato guys. You get on Sainsbury's website, if you're buying online Sainsbury's groceries, there are 20 plus tomato SKUs, so different tomato products. You've got to go to night school, to understand what you're buying. It's completely, no, you need a PhD in tomato buying. And so, we don't help our consumers, our shoppers. But let me link it back to what I was saying too. But remember, and also the supermarkets and us in the horticulture, we don't remind people about why they should be buying, the health advantages. You talk to Unilever, and if they've got a product that has the sniff of a health benefit, then it's right front of pack. We've never done that because we assume that everybody knows. There's no need to tell them about the vitamin C. They're all bright. No, we just got to be better at that.
I suppose the flip side of that, though, is that when I've looked into kind of health claims around products, it's not necessarily easy, and there's a whole load of hurdles and regulations and claims. But I suppose the flip side of it is maybe we just do make that assumption that everybody assumes the product is healthy, and I suppose that ties in with the marketing. And really interesting, you talk about the US as in normal times. Go see what they're doing in the US in terms of adding value, in terms of creating brands. Yeah. Question for you: what role have agricultural cooperatives got in terms of trying to add value?
Well, they can add value. They were set up in history, of course, to give individual producers more clout. I mean, the fact of the matter is that if you're talking about, let me go back to Zespri. It's not a cooperative. It's something. It's more sort of legislative than that because it's virtually a monopoly, not quite a monopoly, but you need that scale. You need that scale, putting people together to invest in R&D, to invest in marketing and promotion. It's very difficult for individuals to do that. And we haven't in history. It's not part of our culture. And then when we try to do it, we often fail. Why? Because we haven't experienced. So, clearly, I'm very pro cooperatives, notwithstanding that they have their particular problems. Outside of the group that I'm talking to now, if we looked at, say, dairy cooperatives and meat cooperatives around the world, they, in general, underperform on R&D expenditure and on brand development expenditure. Why they do that is a farmer problem, because the owners of cooperatives turn around to their management if the management has made a profit from the cooperative, and say, send the money back to us. We know what to do best with it. And often it's not what they'll reinvest in farming. Great stuff, but it doesn't give you enough money to be able to invest in R&D at a basic level and promotion at a marketing level.
So I guess it comes back to one of the key points for me that jumps out when you talk is about UK agriculture more broadly has been something that is very much kind of production led rather than going, what is it the consumer and market wants?
Yeah, but we produce, push it between our legs and hope somebody else picks it up the other side. Not good enough.
I want to jump back to some of the plant-based stuff that you talked about quite early on, and I suppose the plant-based are really positioned as being very environmentally friendly, very green. It's been a while since I did chemistry, but I know how much energy it takes to turn something that is a solid into a liquid. And when you start thinking about soya or almonds and where they come from, the water that's involved, actually, how robust is that perception?
Look, it's feathery. It's not robust. And how worried are people about it? Well, they don't want excesses. I think it depends. I had my eyes opened when I was in Canada giving a talk, and the guy was sort of looking after to make sure that I didn't sneak off somewhere. He was a young man, and he was a vegetarian. And I asked him, I said, why would you want to buy something like a plant-based burger that looks like a burger? Thinking that was a clever question. And he looked at me astonished and said, David, everybody loves a burger. I just want a burger without meat. And so I said, well, trying to recover, said, well, what if it's not environmentally friendly, as less environmentally friendly you think? He said, I don't want a burger made from animals, David. Have you got it? So, this is a sort of complex thing in the head. It's a bit of environment, there's a bit of animal welfare, and out of that comes a buying decision, which doesn't have to be rational. Because remember, for most consumers, they don't know a lot of science. They don't necessarily trust science. And many of the decisions are much more emotional than scientific. And I think that's the sort of the real challenge for us, is you've got to sort of make your science-based argument, but then also relate to what are the values of the people who are buying my product, because we better be in tune with their values or else they'll just turn off.
Okay. David, there was one slide you used that I think was from FPJ Live last week that you attributed to Kantar. I think Jan England's been in touch. I think it was an England marketing slide. But one of the things you mentioned quite early on was about how COVID and it's changed where we shop. So some of that interest in shopping locally, which I'm sure has been driven by availability and just, I don't want to go to a supermarket, or when I get there I have to queue, or they haven't got what I want. But I'm conscious that whether it's milkmen, whether it's farm shops, there has been an uptick in terms of that. But do you see kind of that a similar role or success for, I guess, hyper local or small producers when it comes to produce?
I think without a doubt. As long as they can deliver the service. Of course, they have other issues which relate to 52-week availability, etc. But without a doubt, the COVID experience have made people way more sort of community positive. That you've found out these small guys were here when we needed them. We need to be there when they need us. And I think it's it's a good story. And back to us, look, pre-COVID, people were moving in that direction anyway. They wanted the story. They want that local story. Part of what I do for a living is I work with my son, who has a couple of restaurants in North Devon, and his menus are all local based. It's all about the farmer, and it's sort of very powerful. I mean, he's doing really well under very difficult conditions, and a lot of the plaudits that he gets relate to, we feel really good about the food you serve and the fact that you are working with local guys. That's very strong, as long as they can deliver. It's been a real plus, I think, for traditional greengrocers and butchers. In my little town of Monmouth, you see the really tiny greengrocer guy, he's been brilliant. He was straight into delivery, working with older people, etc. And he's got a secure business because he knows his customer. That's all.
And I guess it's been convenience and circumstance that has driven people there. It's about the quality of service and the quality of produce, I guess, that keeps them. The poll that we asked questions, the kind of headline point was around what's the biggest concern. Tariffs and trade came out top of the tree there. So just I guess jump back to Brexit. I suppose you're confident that it will go down to the wire. It'll be late. It might be hard work, but we'll get a deal. So, but
we'll limp
it makes
there.
sense to trade with people. What about more widely? So kind of when I look at our self-sufficiency in a whole host of something in the fresh produce angle, it's been slipping backwards. Where do you see us in 10 years' time?
I think there's real opportunity to again, back to an early slide. I said what's our best market is our home market, and increasingly if we have technology that allows us to extend our season, for whatever the crop might be. If you look at the extension of, if I was to look in horticulture, use of high tunnels, it's hardly high tech, but how it's extended seasons, brilliant. And also it's sort of consonant with what people want anyway. They want to buy the local, but we've been so used for so long for getting produce from all over the world, and that's most unusual. So if I'm in Australia, for example, then I mean, what the Australian agricultural industry has done really well is convince 27 million Australians that if it doesn't come from Australia, it's probably going to kill you. And so that there's some really strongly Aussie agri positive. But for us, we've always been huge importers, and here I am. I'm supposed to be enviro sensitive, etc. Well, I'm straight into my Peruvian blueberries, as I mentioned, at 89p a punnet, thinking, how on earth can they do that? How can you grow them in Peru, put them into a punnet, and get them to Westfield-le-Parade, Monmouth for 89 pence? That's. And I don't want that. I want to see more self-sufficiency. I'm not an autarkic person. It's a wonderful word for self-sufficiency. But I think we need to compete with the wider world, but we need a bigger slice of our market. That won't necessarily help people who say in broad-scale arable, because yes, barley or whatever the crop may be, we've got good export markets, and at scale we can be international. We can be international, but in general, it's tough trucking out there because we're late starting in many cases in export markets. That doesn't mean we can't do it, but it takes time to develop these markets.
Yeah, and it's a challenging one, isn't it? Because we're not going to go toe to toe, compete like for like with big commodity producers. Similarly, no. let's take dairy. I always say you need to export an awful lot of artisan cheese to use 14 billion litres of milk that we produce in the UK. So for me, it's about focus. I'm really conscious of the time, so I've got just one last question for you. You've mentioned throughout just how some of the kind of new startups in plant-based have been, the chief finance officers there have done a great job of raising investment. And I'd just be interested where, if you were to put your money into one of the food technologies or brands, where would you put it?
Right. I mean, given that I'm not in the first flush of youth, and whatever money I've got, I'm pretty careful with it. Just at the moment, I'm astonished. I'm not answering a question, but I'm astonished at the amount of money that goes in, as I mentioned, into vertical agriculture. For example, which is, after all, like fancy hydroponics. Hydroponics isn't new. Either hydroponic a business in Florida 25 years ago. But when I say millions of dollars going in, somebody thinks, I mean, they're not stupid, but maybe they've just got too much money. There's a lot of Californian Silicon Valley money where they've made vast amounts of money, and then they're also very sustainably related, and and they're putting large swaths in there. It worries me that more of it's not coming our way, because I think there are great ideas here, but it's not the center of venture capital. So I wouldn't put it into vertical farming. And what's more, on plant-based, say fake meats, so-called fake meats, there's been a tsunami of new products, and a lot of them are new firms. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you just watch the big companies, big food companies, just watch the performance of those little companies, and then most fail. Like out of 10, probably 8 will fail, and then of the 2 left, the big food firms will wait, right, who's going to do? And then once they get over a certain level, they go boom, and they go and buy it. And so, where would I put my money? I wouldn't put my money anywhere near there. I just watch others do it. And, big food can afford to lose it. I mean, I can afford to lose a little bit, but not a lot.
Thanks, David. That's a great non-answer to the question. Fantastic. So, David, thanks a lot. You've covered a huge array of topics in time. We've run out of time for questions, I'm afraid. What we'll try and do from AHDB is maybe pick up some of those questions and some of the kind of market insight we're providing. It'd be great for those that have joined us this afternoon to be able to complete the feedback form that will appear on your screen once the webinar finishes. As I mentioned at the outset, we'll get the video to you in the next 24 hours and the slides will be online. If you've enjoyed this webinar and you're wanting more, you can sign up to receive AHDB's Consumer Insight newsletter. We get that direct to your inbox every couple of months. We've also got some more detailed webinars looking at the performance of different farming sectors, particularly through the early days of COVID and through the course of this year. They're coming up in the next couple of weeks. Check out ahdb.org.uk/events for that. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and thanks again, David. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed my hour. I hope everybody else has. Thank you. Bye-bye.